My mom drunkenly confessed to how she treated my late sister as ashes, and it's ruined our family. My parents divorced when I was young, and my mom remarried not long after. Eventually, they had an unplanned baby, my little sister. Unfortunately, her arrival strained their marriage and eventually broke it apart. Despite the chaos surrounding her birth, my sister was the light of my life. 4 years ago, that light was cruelly extinguished in a sudden accident when she was only 14. Her death shattered us all. People say the hardest part of grieving is getting through the first holidays, the first birthday, the first year without them. But no one warns you about the pain of the nevers, the milestones they'll never get to experience. When your mind wanders to what should have been, like shopping for her prom dress or helping her plan her future, and you realize none of it will ever happen, it's like losing her all over again. That pain bubbled to the surface during a conversation with my mom recently. We were sitting together, both drinking, reminiscing about my sister and how much we missed her. Out of nowhere, my mom let something slip that completely blindsided me. The ashes I thought were my sister's, the ones I carried in a necklace close to my heart for the last 4 years, were not her ashes at all. They were just ashes. Burnt wood. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I froze, waiting for her to backtrack, but she didn't. She admitted that she had already scattered my sister's ashes without telling me or my brother. She chose a plot she bought with my stepdad, a place my sister would have had no connection to. I was stunned. My mom didn't seem to grasp the magnitude of what she'd done. To her, the physical ashes didn't matter. She said it was about the sentiment and the memory of my sister, not the literal ashes. But that's exactly why I was so furious. Those emotions were tied to her, not some random pile of soot I had unknowingly carried for years. I had been walking around with what I thought was a piece of my sister's soul, only to find out it was a lie. I snapped. I started yelling, demanding that she leave my house. She tried to explain herself, saying it was all done with good intentions, but I wasn't having it. I locked the door behind her and called my stepdad to come pick her up. I was shaking with rage. When I looked down at the necklace still hanging around my neck, I felt sick. I ripped it off and threw it out onto the front lawn. The moment it left my hand, I regretted it. I ran outside, only to see my mom pick it up. I stormed over, snatched it out of her hand, and shouted that it wasn't hers to touch. She looked so heartbroken, but I didn't care at the time. She stood on the sidewalk, crying, while I yelled every insult I could think of. She kept trying to get back inside to talk, but I screamed at her to stay out or I'd call the cops. My stepdad finally arrived, and I saw him gently guide her to the car. She turned away from me, her face streaked with tears, and they drove off. The next day, my stepdad left me a voicemail. He said he understood why I was upset and that my anger was justified, but he also urged me to talk to my mom. He reminded me that she's a grieving mother too, and that my sister's death affected everyone in the family. He said we're all still trying to heal, and I should show some compassion. But all I can think about is the lie. For years of believing my sister was right there with me, close to my heart, and it was all a fabrication. How long would my mom have let me believe it? How long would she have kept up the pretense if she hadn't slipped up while drinking? At the same time, I can't get the image of her face out of my head. The way she cried when I tore the necklace out of her hands, the way she turned away, completely broken, as my stepdad led her to the car. I called her horrible names. I let my pain and anger take over, and I know I hurt her deeply. Now I'm left torn between my anger and my guilt. I feel betrayed, but I also wonder if I went too far. Did I overreact? Am I the asshole for the way I handled it? When I first confronted my mom about lying to me for years about the ashes in my necklace, I gave her a clear ultimatum. She could tell my dad and brother the truth, or I would. She outright refused. Her reasoning? You reacted so horribly. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "You're doing this to hurt me, and you'll only end up hurting them." But I couldn't carry this secret any longer. It wasn't fair to them, and it wasn't fair to me. So I told them. I sat my dad and brother down and explained everything. The necklaces we were given didn't contain my sister's ashes. Instead, They were filled with ordinary wood ash. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of my words sank in. Then, my dad broke down in a way I had never seen before. My brother, however, was furious. Not at our mom, but at me, at least at first. He shouted, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? This is the kind of thing you have to tell me. We tell each other everything." His words cut deep, but I could see the anger wasn't really directed at me. It was the shock, the betrayal, the overwhelming grief he didn't know how to process. Moments later, he started crying and apologized. He hugged me, his voice shaking as he said, "I'm not mad at you. I'm just so angry about what Mom did. I don't know how to handle it." It turns out my brother and I are more alike than I realized. We both let the initial wave of emotion crash over us before we can pull ourselves together. My dad, despite his own devastation, tried to stay composed for us. He looked utterly gutted, but he reached out to comfort my brother and me. He reminded us of something I'd heard from others after my initial post about this. We can still find meaning in the necklaces. We can even take some dirt from the plot where she was scattered. She's still with us, even if her ashes aren't physically here. I'll admit, those words hit differently coming from him. Maybe it's because he wasn't the one who lied to me for 4 years. He didn't drop this bombshell on me out of nowhere, forcing me to untangle a web of deception. Instead, he held us close as we cried together, apologizing for the pain we were going through.
"This isn't fair," he said.
"You shouldn't have had to be the adult in this situation. Your mother should have told all of us a long time ago." My dad promised he'd try to find out where my sister's ashes were scattered. He said he'd talk to my stepdad since my mom has completely shut down communication. She won't answer her phone or reply to messages, and her social media has gone dark. My dad is determined to find the plot, but I don't know if I'll be able to go there. The idea of seeing that unkempt, unvisited place feels like the final confirmation that this nightmare is real. My mom and I have had issues before. What parent and child haven't? But this is on a completely different level. Even during the rough patch when I came out and we didn't speak for a while, we eventually reconciled. This, though, I can't see how I could ever forgive her. Not when she lied to me for years, blamed me for my reaction when the truth came out, and then left me to deal with the fallout alone. When we initially discussed cremation, we all agreed that each of us would get a necklace containing some of my sister's ashes. Looking back now, so many things make sense. The times my mom nearly slipped up, the little details that didn't add up. Like the time she almost left her necklace behind on a trip, but didn't panic the way I would have. Of course, she didn't panic. She knew where my sister really was the entire time. She was also the one who volunteered to separate the ashes, and she gave my dad the rest. Now I'm certain his portion is fake too. This revelation has left me in pieces. I've spent the past week crying off and on, feeling like I can't breathe. I've also been consumed by anger that hits me at the worst moments. I'll be at work, and suddenly, I'm rushing to the bathroom to hide the fact that I'm breaking down again. After my sister's death, I quit smoking, but now I've picked it back up. It's the only thing that seems to calm the storm in my chest. My dad calls me every day to check on me, reminding me how much he and my brother love me. My brother has been coming over daily with his girlfriend to make sure I eat something. I feel like such a burden. They're both struggling with this revelation too, yet they're the ones making sure I'm okay. I've decided to look into grief counseling again, but it's not as simple as I'd hoped. The therapist I saw after my sister passed isn't practicing anymore, and my current insurance doesn't cover many options. Sometimes I try to focus on the positives. I remind myself that my little sister wouldn't mind being part of the earth, becoming part of the grass and flowers. Once we find her resting place, I want to make sure it's always beautiful, even if she was laid to rest there without our knowledge or consent. Thank you to everyone who shared their own stories and advice with me. It means more than you know. Let me start with the news about my sister. After weeks of silence, my mom finally responded, but not to me. She reached out to my brother instead. According to him, she was a complete wreck during the conversation, crying, apologizing, and throwing out phrases like, "You have to understand." But the truth is, I don't understand. I can't fathom how she could lie to us for years, and I feel this deep, primal anger toward her. I want her to hurt as much as she's hurt us. I want to expose her actions to everyone and watch her face the consequences. And yet, every time I let those thoughts linger, the rational part of my mind kicks in. What good would it do? I just end up feeling guilty and empty after the brief satisfaction. Still, the question haunts me. How could she do this to us?
To my brother?
Her relationship with him has always been stronger than her relationship with me. Even when my dad and her struggled to co-parent after the divorce, she and my brother maintained their bond. Yet, she still betrayed him. She tried to excuse her actions by claiming it was impulsive, a decision made in a moment of emotional turmoil. But when my brother pressed her on why she volunteered to fill the necklaces in the first place, her story shifted. She said she was okay with it at first, but when she saw the ashes, she couldn't bring herself to separate them. She didn't want to destroy my sister further. Destroy? That's the word she used. But what about the destruction she caused to her living children? To the trust we placed in her? To the memory of my sister that we all agreed to preserve? I don't even know if I believe her. The way she worded it makes it sound premeditated, as though she planned to deceive us from the start. And once again, the truth only came out because her lies unraveled under pressure. I've taken some steps to cope, though everything feels overwhelming. I contacted the funeral director and found out that my sister's fingerprints are on record. I plan to get her touch tattooed on me, a permanent way to carry her memory. For my brother and dad, I'm looking into getting necklaces made with her fingerprint. It's not the same as what we thought we had, but it's something real. Unfortunately, I've hit roadblocks in trying to contact the cemetery where her ashes were scattered. My emails and voicemails have gone unanswered, and it feels like I'm shouting into the void. I've also started looking for therapists who might help me navigate this mess. I have an appointment coming up soon, but I'm nervous. My previous therapist, who helped me after my sister died, isn't practicing anymore, and finding someone new feels daunting. My stepfather has taken a hands-off approach, or more accurately, he's drawn a line in the sand. He refuses to talk to me or my brother unless we agree not to blame anyone. The moment the conversation turns toward motives or timelines, he shuts it down. He's hung up on us more than once and even threatened to call the police on me. The irony isn't lost on me, this coming from the same man who implied I deserved it when I threatened to call the cops on my mom. In the middle of all this, life continues. I recently got a promotion at work, one I'd been aiming for long before this nightmare began. My boss told me I'd earned it before everything went down, but they delayed the announcement to give me time to adjust to the new responsibilities. A month ago, I would have been proud of this achievement. Now, I feel numb. I'm working longer hours, usually from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and while the paycheck is nice, I think I'm using work as a way to shut everything else out. Both my dad and brother have been urging me to work less, but in some ways, I think the long hours are helping. By the time I get home, I'm too exhausted to think, and that's a welcome relief. One thing I've had to address is my drinking. After blacking out one night, a first for me, I let my dad take all the alcohol from my house. I haven't bought more since, but the memory of losing control like that terrifies me. As I write this, I feel like my emotions are swinging wildly between anger, grief, and complete numbness. Sometimes, I think about how my sister wouldn't have minded becoming part of the earth, woven into the grass, the flowers, the trees. I remind myself that, once we know where she was scattered, I can honor her memory by making sure her resting place is cared for. But then, the anger returns. The lies my mom told, the pain she caused, and the relationship she destroyed. How do I reconcile any of it? I keep reliving every moment when things didn't add up. Every near slip, every detail that makes sense in hindsight. It feels like a constant cycle of remembering, hurting, and breaking all over again. If there's one bright spot, it's the support from my dad and brother. My dad calls me every day to check on me, reminding me how much he loves me. My brother, who's been processing his own grief and anger, comes over daily with his girlfriend to make sure I'm eating. I don't know what I'd do without them. Thank you to everyone who has offered support and shared your stories. It helps more than you know. This feels like I've been trapped in an endless loop of frustration, grief, and hopelessness. I wish I had good news to share, but I don't. My days are consumed by work, and everything else is a blur of uncertainty and anger. For now, I'm just trying to keep going, even though it feels like I'm moving through quicksand. I tried therapy again. I managed to attend a few sessions with someone who worked hard to fit me into her schedule. I'm grateful for her effort, but I didn't feel like it was the right fit. Each session left me feeling unheard, like we were missing the core of what I needed. So I'm back to searching for a therapist, even though it feels entitled to say that. Meanwhile, my dad is struggling more than he lets on. He's been so consumed with trying to fix things for my brother and me that he's ignoring his own well-being. Watching him like this is painful, and I feel helpless to ease his burden. My brother, on the other hand, is drowning in rage. I've never seen him this angry or heard him speak with such venom about our mom and stepfather. It feels like we're all stuck in survival mode, just existing without moving forward. My brother and I both tried to use the cemetery's plot information to locate where my sister was scattered. We hit a dead end. The cemetery is full, no new burials are being accepted, and I couldn't even get the plot numbers. I was so overwhelmed by frustration that I broke down crying. It wasn't the cemetery's fault. They were just following their rules, but it was another crushing blow in this mess. My mom still refuses to talk to me beyond one significant exception. Even her conversations with my brother have become sporadic and cautious, with her shutting everything down the moment things get too uncomfortable. The one exception was her offer. She approached me with what she framed as a peace offering, the chance to purchase the cemetery plot. According to her, my brother and I could share it and eventually be buried alongside our sister. She painted it as an act of reconciliation, as if she were doing me a favor. But the cost? Over $9,500 when you add up the liner, plot, headstone, permits required by our state, and care fees. My mom and stepfather generously offered to cover the cost of the headstone to make up for us not being there when the ashes were scattered. No mention of how my dad wasn't included either, and certainly no genuine apology. What she essentially told me was this: if you want access to your sister's resting place, pay me for the privilege. I want to believe this isn't as cruel as it feels. I want to agree with my stepfather's insistence that this is her way of trying to mend things. But deep down, it feels manipulative, like one final insult to the relationship she's already shattered. There's a growing part of me that just wants to walk away, to leave my mom and her schemes behind, to let go of the cemetery plot, and to make peace with what little I have left of my sister. I hate myself for even thinking that. I feel like a terrible child, and my stepfather's dismissive attitude only makes that guilt worse. I tried to offer a compromise. I told him I'd be content with just a small bit of dirt from the plot to create a memorial of my own. But he lashed out, threatening to sell the plot back to the cemetery because, in his words, clearly nothing else will satisfy you. My brother and I agree it's likely an empty threat. If my sister's ashes are truly there, we both know our mom wouldn't part with that connection. But even if we bought the plot, we both suspect she'd still visit. There's a voice in the back of my mind that keeps whispering doubts. What if the ashes aren't even there? What if my mom lied about that too? It wouldn't be the first time she concocted an elaborate story. And yet, I keep looking at my bank account, wondering if I should just buy the plot for peace of mind. My brother is staunchly against it. He thinks her offer is cruel and manipulative, but I'm not so sure. He's angry, and rightfully so, but I can't tell if his refusal comes from principle or from his fury. I could afford it if I rearranged some bills and worked more hours. I keep telling myself that maybe this is the only way to get closure. But the deadline she gave me looms closer, and I feel paralyzed by indecision. My dad has stepped in, trying to figure out the legal side of this nightmare. He's determined to find a way to force my mom to disclose the location of the plot or to ensure we have access to it. But the options seem limited, and the process feels endless. He's frustrated and exhausted, and I hate that he's carrying this weight for us. I've even considered the drastic option of reporting to the cemetery that ashes were scattered without their permission. But what would that accomplish? My worst fear is that they take action to clean the plot or revoke access entirely. I know I'm catastrophizing, but the paranoia feels impossible to shake. So here I am, months after that horrible night with my mom, and nothing has changed. If anything, it feels worse. I'm not sleeping much, and the only thing that seems to be going well in my life is work. At least I haven't gone back to drinking. To everyone who has supported me here, thank you. Your kindness has been a lifeline, offering a stability and perspective that I can't find in my own life right now. I don't know what comes next, but I'm grateful to have this space to share and reflect. About a month ago, my boss insisted I take a Saturday off work. Normally, Saturdays are busy for me, so I wasn't used to having nothing to do. Feeling restless, I decided to visit the park. The day was gray, muggy, and damp from rain. It wasn't pleasant, and my sister would have been the first to complain, asking to head to a restaurant instead so she could people watch from a cozy corner. I probably looked odd sitting there, lost in thought while my mind raced. The deadline my mom gave me loomed in the back of my mind like a heavy cloud, making me anxious and angry every time I thought about it. It felt like a weight I couldn't escape. I've lost so much. My sister, my mother, my stepfather. At times, I feel like I've lost my sanity. But there are still things I haven't lost. My brother, my father, and my job remain constants in my life. My work gives me purpose and stability, so I made a decision. I stopped trying to reach out to my mom. When the deadline she set passed, I let it go. Then the tables turned. She started reaching out to me instead. At first, it was subtle, calls without voicemails and texts asking if I was home or if I could call her. Then came the social media posts, vague and guilt-trippy, about how isolation causes mental illness in the elderly. My stepfather left voicemails too, urging me to open the door to communication and reconciliation. The attempts became more intense, calls during work hours, in the middle of the night. One time, I accidentally answered because I didn't check the caller ID. She immediately accused me of being cruel, and I hung up, blocking both her and my stepfather. Things escalated. My stepfather showed up at my door with a box. A neighbor saw him waiting on my porch for 10 minutes before he eventually left it behind. When I opened the box, it was filled with old crafts and gifts I'd made as a child, those crude, sentimental projects you bring home from school. I burned everything in it. Watching the flames consume those fragments of the past felt strangely freeing, as if I could finally breathe after being underwater for too long. My mom then tried to use my dad as a messenger.
He refused.
He called to ask me how I felt and what I wanted to do. When I told him I was done with her, he supported me fully, cutting off contact with her as well. My brother, while mostly on the same page, expressed his frustration differently. He commented on one of her passive-aggressive posts about this generation not knowing how to care for family, hinting at the grave, and leaving it at that. It's been nearly 2 weeks since she last tried to contact me. I've been working on letting go, not just of her, but also of the ashes and the plot. I'm trying to focus on honoring my sister's memory in ways that reflect who she truly was. I started seeing a new therapist, someone who specializes in grief and trauma. It's still early, but I feel more connected to him than my previous therapist. Therapy is as challenging as I remembered. It's hard to face the loss of my sister all over again, now redefined by betrayal. It's equally hard to grapple with the loss of the relationship I had with my mom, flawed as it was. No matter how imperfect, a child still craves that bond with their parent. Coming to terms with how deep her lies ran, and continue to run, is exhausting. Sometimes, I wonder if her actions stem from grief or if she never truly loved me. To channel my emotions into something constructive, I opened a separate bank account and set aside $2,000. I use this account to buy small things for myself, treat my family, or do something meaningful. It's a way to create moments of joy and purpose that aren't tied to the plot or her ashes. Recently, my dad, brother, and I planned a trip to a campground my sister loved. I made the reservations and bought some flowers. I even went to a restaurant my sister and I used to visit together. Sitting there, I could almost feel her presence, like she had just stepped away and might return at any moment. In a strange way, she never really left. This account forces me to focus on living in the present, even while I carry her memory with me. I'm still struggling to cut back on work, though. I average 70 to 75 hours a week because it keeps my mind busy. Work is something I'm good at, and in these moments, it feels like a lifeline. My sister was always so giving, even with the little she had. She would spend her allowance or holiday money on everyone else, our parents, my stepfather, my brother, me, and her friends, before ever thinking of herself. She made birthdays and holidays special, always going the extra mile. I remember how she used to sneak money into my wallet when she thought I needed it, even though I would lecture her about saving her own. I'd secretly add money back into her little bank, and I'm sure she knew. Looking back, I realized that how I'm handling things now, spending money on meaningful moments and others, feels like I'm carrying a part of her forward. She would have wanted me to do this instead of wasting energy on the plot. She would have told me to let it go, not to buy it. I can almost hear her saying, "Don't even think about it." She was always looking out for everyone else. I want to honor that. It's been a while since I've posted here or anywhere else. My last update wasn't exactly my finest moment, and honestly, I don't think I'll feel the need to share again after this. Still, I plan to keep this account since lurking in grief support communities has been a huge comfort to me. To everyone here, I want to say how much your kindness and understanding have meant to me. It's helped me feel less alone, and even less like everything was somehow my fault. I've finally received my sister's fingerprints. It took countless calls to follow up, and each time, I was terrified the response would be as dismissive as my mother tends to be. But the person I spoke with was so deeply apologetic for the delay. As strange as it sounds, it was comforting, almost selfishly so, to have someone genuinely regret not keeping a promise. My dad also found something precious, a baby footprint of hers preserved in clay, one of the few keepsakes my mom had let him keep. Now, I'm searching for a tattoo artist to help me memorialize her. I'm still here, and I'm still sober, 100 days tomorrow since my last relapse. My dad is thriving. He's made great friends at a community center with events and outings for older folks. My brother is engaged to an incredible woman who brings out the best in him. She's warm, intuitive, and has this remarkable way of making people feel genuinely valued. I've been thinking about spending some one-on-one time with her to strengthen our bond. It could be good for both of us. My mother visited me out of the blue on September 14th. Against my better judgment, I let her in. To my surprise, she started with an apology, something I never expected. "I'm so sorry I hurt you with her ashes," she said, and for a moment, I believed she meant it.
But it didn't last.
I told her I didn't want to discuss my sister. Predictably, she ignored my boundaries and spiraled into guilt tripping. Through tears, she claimed she'd been trying to make things right all along, though she admitted her actions had been thoughtless. She painted herself as a grieving mother overwhelmed by pain and said we hadn't supported her attempts to find a solution that worked for everyone. I didn't press for details, but I'm more convinced than ever that she did something unethical with my sister's ashes. I stood my ground this time. I thanked her for the apology, but didn't forgive her. I avoided saying, "It's okay," or anything that might absolve her. Instead, I focused on seeing if I could even tolerate her presence without reopening old wounds. We talked about trivial things, her work, her hobbies. I even hugged her, though I regretted it later. I realized she was trying to manipulate me back into her orbit. In the moment, I didn't see it. I promised to call her, but made it clear I wasn't ready for regular visits. She hated that. Before leaving, she accused me of isolating myself, saying, "Keeping yourself alone is an ugly way to live. You'll regret it later." She even dragged my sister's memory into it, claiming she'd hate what I was doing to the family. Her words were a match to my already smoldering frustration. I lost my composure and said things I'd never said to anyone before, words filled with anger and years of pent-up pain. I called out every way she had hurt me, from missing milestones in my life to treating me like I was second best to my brother. It was an ugly moment, and I know it gave her ammunition to paint herself as the victim. When she slammed the door on her way out, it caught my hand. Then, she threatened to dump my sister's ashes down the drain. I chased her to her car, screaming, overcome with a fury I never felt before. She drove off, and I haven't spoken to her since. My therapist compared her persistence to a toddler throwing tantrums, hoping for a cookie. The longer I hold firm, the more likely she is to seek attention elsewhere. That fight took a physical toll. I started experiencing heart palpitations, dizziness, and breathlessness. Ignoring it at first, I eventually had a minor incident that landed me in the ER. The diagnosis? Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, a heart condition brought on by prolonged emotional strain. Thankfully, lifestyle changes and medication have helped me recover. I've since cut back on work hours and quit smoking. My dad still checks in regularly, and my brother and his fiancée drop by often. My next-door neighbor, who called 911 for me, has been incredibly kind without making me feel pitied. She brought over tea and meals after the incident and later gifted me a jar opener after I borrowed hers. Her quiet support inspired me to start baking again, something I used to love. I began leaving treats at her door and, eventually, at others' doors in the neighborhood. Over time, I've gotten to know the family across the street who've been dealing with their struggles. I've started bringing them meals and helping out where I can. Whether it's spending time with their kids or lending a hand around the house, it's been fulfilling to feel like I'm making a positive difference. The kids are a joy. The older one loves organizing things and creating elaborate stories, while the younger one greets me with unfiltered enthusiasm. Their energy has been a light in my life. Halloween was a surprising delight. For the first time, I decorated, dressed up, and handed out candy. Seeing familiar faces from the neighborhood and hearing kind words reminded me that I'm part of a community now. It's inspired me to consider getting involved in local events or volunteering next year. The holidays are still hard, especially without my sister. But I've made plans with my dad, brother, and therapist to navigate them. Thanksgiving was spent with family, and for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful. I even invited my neighbor over for pie and tree shopping. My mother's husband dropped off a plate of food and a note, which I promptly threw away. I'll address it with my therapist, but for now, I'm staying firm in keeping those boundaries. My brother's fiancée recently asked me to help her shop for a wedding dress. I know it's her way of including me, and I'm deeply touched. She's considering going back to school before the wedding, and I've been thinking about using the remaining money I set aside to help them. As for my mother, I've stopped caring about what she'll do with the rest of her life. Her manipulation is not love, and recognizing that has helped me move forward. The pain of letting her go is real, but I'm letting myself feel it instead of trying to fix it. She isn't the mother I wish she were, and she isn't someone I'd choose to have in my life if she weren't family. There's more to my life now than my sister's loss or my mother's chaos. I'm connecting with others, making plans, and finding small joys in my days. The grief is still there, a gaping hole, but I'm learning how to live without falling into it. Thank you to everyone who's been a part of my journey. Your support has meant more than words can express. Tonight, I'm heading out to dinner with my neighbor, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time.